Many LARPers engage in the activity out of a passion for the hobby. Unfortunately, running a LARP as a business involves certain legal ramifications. This panel will discuss the various legal issues that can arise when organizing LARP games, running conventions, and publishing game materials. A little bit about me. My name is McElroy. I am the Director of Publishing for Drive-Thru RPG. I also freelance for Onyx Path, and I'm the Creative Director for Margaret Weiss Productions.
I'm Zdeb. I run Dystopia Rising and an array of other projects that we do. Dystopia Rising is a franchise network, so I handle all of the business. If it's paperwork or logistics, I take care of it.
I'm Jason Webb. I'm an intellectual property attorney, so I do patents, trademarks, copyrights, licensing, things like that. I've been gaming ever since I knew that there was gaming, and so that's my tribe, and I love that. I teach a class at Gen Con, but I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. I help people do launches of different things, and so I know a lot about what it takes to get protected and be protected and to enforce your rights, those sorts of things.
I'm Michael Pucci. I'm the COO creatively for Eschaton Media, also co-founder Dystopia Rising, the franchise network. I do the actual design work for Dystopia Rising, Chronos Universal Card System, LARP system, and another of their RPGs and LARPs as well.
Awesome. So this is going to be active participation. So if you got questions, we have a ton of topics we can babble about, but we also want to hear from you, like what topics you're interested in, what questions you have. So just raise your hand and we'll jump around the topics a bunch. One of the things I want to talk about franchising a little bit versus licensing, and Dystopia Rising would be a good start for that. So go ahead, jump in.
So Dystopia Rising is a franchise. It has just become an official franchise in the last year or so. It took us about, we used to be through an array of adventures. We were an unintentional franchise for a short period of time, and then a license, and now we are an official franchise. It took about a year to get all of that paperwork compiled and made a reality. And so now that's how we do that. We have another game line coming out. It's going to be licensing instead, and we can, I'm happy to talk about maybe why we made those choices in the different ways. If people are interested.
I'd love to hear the reasoning behind those two.
What is the actual difference?
So
Whole lot of paperwork.
a lot of monthly bills from our lawyer. They're great.
Also,
I love I joke that had you told me 10 years ago that I would honestly say the sentence, I love our lawyers, I would have laughed at you, but it's true. They're great. So the difference, and please feel free to jump in on this, because my understanding is only based on my interactions with it. The difference between a licensing and what makes you a franchise is three components. So one is whether there's a fee, a regular charge that you have. Franchises, DR branches pay the network a standard percentage every month. Oversight, how much you oversee their day-to-day, or in our terms, more so month-to-month, how they run their business, how they manage those things. And then I forget the term that they use, but the bubble that you allow them to run within. So we give them the Dystopia Rising materials. Michael's got thousands of pages. I've got manuals, all that stuff. We give them those things, and those branches are required to run within that scope. They can't introduce dinosaurs. No, not dinosaurs. We introduce dinosaurs.
Who would do something crazy like that?
I can show you guys pictures later if you want to see them. You can't include space monsters or time travel. These things that don't fit within the Dystopia Rising world, you can't introduce them. It's built into the contract. If it was just a licensing, then we would give you the material. There may or may not be a fee, and you can just kind of run. If we give you the material and we have a good time. And so the way that it loosely works is if the contract that you're sharing with your people fulfills those three items, then you are a franchise.
the kind of the big picture view of it, it's sort of a cousin to securities law, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with securities law, but basically, if I'm going to sell you an investment, right, I'm going to tell you a lot of things, and I'm going to get you to trust in me and rely on me, and I'm going to take your money, and you're going to just passively hope that I do a good job and that I told the truth, and then you get your money plus some back, right? And a franchise isn't exactly that, but it's similar to that in that I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, hey, look, we've figured out how to do this business. And we have, here's the steps you take, here's the processes that you do, here's how to be successful at our business. And if you want to invest money and pay us a fee, we will teach it to you, we will coach you through it, right? We will give you the things that you need to succeed at, all right? And what happens then is that the government says, that's great, that's wonderful, but if you're lying, I'm going to smack you, okay? If you're tricking people into giving them money when you don't really have it figured out, right? And so there's a lot of oversight on that from the government, where the government says, you've got to prove to us that you're taking care of these people, all right? With a license, then you're saying, hey, look, I've got this property, and I think it's valuable, and this is how valuable I think it is, but you know, succeed or fail, that's up to you. And so that's kind of how you draw the line. Now, obviously, there's a continuum of things that you can say or do that bring you closer to a franchise or closer to a license. And every state has its own rules about where that line is, which makes it complicated. Okay, but if in essence you're saying, I am going to help you succeed, then you're really on the franchise side. If you're saying, you know what, here's the property, you give it a go. If you fail at it, I'm going to take it away and give it to someone else, and I'll forget about you, right? Then that's more of a license. And so you do, and since there is a whole lot of work and money that needs to be spent on a franchise, then you do want to be really clear about which one you're doing. You know, which one am I really doing, so that I don't get caught in the middle, and then someone complains, and then one of these states decides that I was a franchise when I wasn't, or at least I didn't think I was. But now I'm getting judged as if I was, and who likes being judged according to standards that they weren't expecting? So,
which is actually also interesting when you get into the design part about what you want to introduce into the world, because if you have the understanding that you are going to have this be a product that you have other games run and operate, whether or not as a franchise or as an individual license, how much direct oversight for things like story, plot, genre materials, ongoing, how much customization of rules they have. Those are all things you have to consider while you're writing your actual game documentation, because it will influence what is feasible when it comes time for the legalese. The second release project that we're working on a larger scale, as we mentioned, one is Dystopia is franchise, Utopia is a licensing. I had to keep that in mind as I was writing all the documentation and the materials that we were writing, so that it didn't creep into the world of franchise.
and it's interesting that Dystopia, we figured out how to do Stopia right, and we can teach you how to do that. I'm making a joke about the naming.
Yeah.
But Utopia, you can figure that about yourself.
It's all a matter of whose perspective it is.
Right.
Because franchise from the creator side can sometimes be dystopia.
Right.
I found it really surprising when we started doing this that it is so common to accidentally make a franchise, that the terms unintentional franchise, accidental franchise, unintended franchise it's just a part of the language. It's, you know, there were some states that we reached out to, and it was just like, hey, I think we might have messed this up, and they're like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. Like, some states hate you, it's fine. You know.
Can you talk to some of the things that might cause that to happen?
Well, when we originally made DR, as we call it amongst ourselves, there was we met all of those points. So we had the oversight, the control, and the fate. Once we realized that that was the case, because Michael and I started DR
It was not
as
meant to be
idiot
this.
children, and so we didn't realize. And as I've learned, it's a real murky water sort of doing it. So I don't feel too bad that I messed it up in the beginning. But when we realized that that was a potential issue, we removed the fate to take ourselves out of that block, but then found that was an unsustainable business model. And so it became, we can either stay in business and move to a franchise, or we would have had to close our doors probably within a year as a whole. So that choice was fairly clear. So we added back in that fee, and then as we were doing, as we did that, we then built. There's a fairly substantial document that is just a full picture of your company. There's audits in it. I think we do them to 3 years that we had to compile, submit federally and to many states, and then the contract as well, which is far longer than it was ever before.
Are there any states that you don't want to expand into because it's too difficult?
New York.
Yep.
Yep.
Though I will admit that I was having a conversation with somebody about upstate New York earlier, because I might eat my own words. But New York is in fact so restrictive as just a humorous piece that the way the state has laws passed the federal government, obviously, that are generally more restrictive, and a lot of states don't have any. I don't have to file with every state, but New York, if I live in Connecticut, if I want to have a conversation with somebody in New Jersey, New York is in the middle, and we meet in New York City for coffee to talk about the franchise, I have to register it with New York State. Wow. Even though I live in Connecticut, they live in Jersey, they're going to do business in Jersey, we're not doing anything. I have to register it with New York State.
Just be glad you don't have to deal with New York State and county health codes.
I don't want to deal with New York for anything, but
You
I
really
might,
don't.
again, I might eat my words sitting here.
Somebody's in New York. You really don't.
I also said I don't want to run a franchise, and well, here we are.
So as part of the franchise, I'd like to talk a little bit about the IP that your company owns, and the fact that you're actually providing that material to these groups. And then there are other large orgs that are using IP owned by other companies. For example, MES last night was running Vampire. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what that means for your company, and then we can kind of extrapolate from there as two other examples, and both the risks that you guys face and the risks that local LARP groups would face, either as your franchise or if they were running DR without your approval, how would you deal with that? That sort of thing, because there are a lot of LARP groups running LARPs based on IP owned by different companies. I know like Firefly and Star Wars LARPs, and obviously they don't have permission to do that. So let's just start with how you deal with providing the IP to franchises and kind of expand from there.
In a literal way, what we do, we have it's all on Dropbox, so it's just easier. We have the printed material that we publish after RPG. But we have the printed material, which is available to everybody. We've got the core book, and then we have the tabletop line, which is tabletop, but realistically, it is sourced material for the LARP. And so those are available to everybody. And I understand, we actually came across not too long ago a group in France, apparently, that has translated the Survivor's Guide, which is our public core book, and is running some version of DR off of that. But since they're running that, but since they're not running the full DR thing, they're just working off of this one book, which has you can't really run a DR off of the Survivor's Guide. It's just the player mechanics and some world stuff. So I'm not gonna, I might reach out to them and ask them if they would like to maybe join us. But we make it all, everything else, all of Michael's stuff is all available on Dropbox.
Yeah, there's over 1,000 pages of documentation of how to handle the different situations, how to organize your staff, how to write a module, the different types of stories that exist in the world. All of our antagonist materials, all of our like the behind-the-scenes materials, and then in addition to all of that, it is something that's not only always growing, but when one of the franchises goes, hey, we have a problem with this, I go, sure, let's take a look. And then we either come up with a solution or we light it on fire.
Yeah, we can update it live, which is nice, because then, when they do downloads every month, so every month we get new stuff. And I certainly worry about it. I worry about the fact that our stuff is digital. The directors sign NDAs with their contracts, it's just standard. And we have them, so the way that the structure of DR works on a local staff level is there's in almost all cases, there's 2 directors, one manages storytelling, one manages coordination, and then under them is a team of storytellers, and that's, they storytell. And then underneath the STs is a team, a much larger team of marshals, and so those marshals do pretty much all the stuff that happens at an event. Marshals, referees, whatever term you use, but they're the people who are kind of out in the field and making calls and watching combat, just doing all this stuff. And so we have material that is only available to STs, and that's a lot of the more kind of the IP, our stuff of how to write modules, how to write worlds and whatnot, and they sign NDAs as well. But there is some inherent risk in it regardless. We make a living off of this world that we have built and this model that we've built, and in a digital age, there's always a risk that somebody's going to download a thing onto a pen drive and go share it with the world. Hasn't happened yet. Certainly possible. I have to choose not to worry about it on a daily basis, I guess is probably what it comes down to, because otherwise I would just stay up all night, just Google search over and over again.
On my side, I end up making contingency plans for if all of this gets out, how do I make all of that irrelevant and replace it with these materials that I haven't given the directors yet? When something becomes public knowledge, it's no longer vital for our staff, or something that they really have to hold on to with an iron fist. So what I do is I have a lot of materials that have already been prepared, that they don't yet have access to, and I will trickle those out on a monthly basis. Here's new materials, here's new materials.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just need some cultural translation here.
Sure thing.
So what do you have? What is it that is so secret that would ruin the game? Are we talking about plot, or are we talking about the backside of the game mechanics? Like, what is it that would make it unplayable if it was
materials
published?
that haven't been published yet.
So
storyline and materials that haven't actually gone to copyright in public sense yet, because those books haven't come out yet.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what we try doing is we get the directors the information about where stories are going to be going before it actually gets there. How we organize our antagonists, how we approach a lot of the very specific theory instead of applied to us, instead of taking that theory and applying it as a general sense.
We also, DR has a lot of its success that comes from the community around the game, and because it's a thing that doesn't really exist in any of the other. I'm making some generalizations here. These are not absolute, but a lot of how we've managed the community of DR is its success, and so the tools that we use to do that, if that got out, if every game had a community that was as positive and I like to think as progressive as we can manage, then we would lose something.
Do you think so? Okay. Let's talk about that later.
One of the other pieces here is that you have to kind of decide where you're okay with people taking your property and where you're not, right? And so the example you gave with the group in France, you're kind of okay with that because it represents a possible opportunity, right? It also represents, someone is out there spreading the word for you, and you don't want to ever, I shouldn't say ever, you'd rather not stifle that. You'd rather let your advocates be advocates and be out spreading the word for who you are and what you do and why they love it, right? And so for example, Games Workshop, they do the Warhammer, right, stuff. They actually have on their website, they have here's all the things that we're okay for you to do. If you're a fan, you can do this and this and this, and here's a link to some art you can use, and we're okay with you using this art in this way, right? They've made it really clear about what's okay, and then on that same webpage, they say what's not okay. They're like, if you do these things, we'll send, our lawyers will send you letters, okay? And every business is a little different, and every, business model is unique, and so you have to decide what you're okay with. And so, for example, the Star Wars LARPs and the Firefly LARPs, right? And my guess is that those don't really threaten the core business, especially Star Wars, right? Because Star Wars, they're all about merchandising, they're all about big productions, right? And they're not merchandising and they're not doing big productions, but what they are doing is they're sort of continually stewing this interest that then will probably result in people buying merchandise and getting tickets to the big productions. So they're not going to stop that, right? Whereas if your business, so in this case, if your business is running LARP events and having them be really high quality and really well directed and having, you know, this big picture view of them, then you would be, you know, not okay with that. So you just have to decide with your business, you know, where do I draw the line, and then how do I communicate that effectively to people so people can feel safe, you know, helping me, but also know where the boundaries are.
There is also an aspect, and I guess this might kind of move into the other part of this question of protecting your IP. These are, you know, these are kind of, they're not hard lines, I don't think, but, you know, if there are instances of somebody using dystopia in a way that we haven't approved, and we let them do that, and then later on someone uses dystopia in a way that we don't approve in a problematic way, say they take the survivor's guide and they reskin it and call it, I would say
a game which has happened, but we
game
shall not.
X that is not the game formerly known as Dystopia Rising, then we would want to address that in a legal way. They could potentially argue that, well, you didn't protect your IP for these guys, so clearly you're okay with it. So it does, and this is not an, I dislike that I have to do it because there are some times when I would like to just let people do things, but I have to protect it on a consistent basis, or I open myself to someday not have a leg to stand on if somebody really genuinely steals the material that we've created.
And a lot of times you'll have a different tone or flavor to the letter that you send out in cases like that. Right? If you think someone's being a rat bastard, you'll send the full-on, bold, underline, you know, triple damages, that sort of thing, right? I don't know if you guys have ever seen those letters. I write them all the time, right? And I'm intentionally, like for example, in those letters, I will not indent the first line in the paragraph because flat block paragraphs are meaner. They just are, right? And I'm trying to be mean. I'm trying to scare them. But in a situation like that where you're like, hey, the only reason I'm doing this is because if I don't do it with you, I can't do it with the rat bastard.
I've only had to send one cease and desist letter ever, and we intentionally wrote it. It was very friendly. It was a reasonable misinterpretation. He had trademarked something that somebody had then used in a similar way, but didn't realize that they should have. So it was very, it was fine.
Yeah.
And it was very much that letter of just like, hey, I have to do this. How can we work this out? You know, do you want me to buy the website from you? You know, it was fine. It was fine. He just renamed the game and moved on. It was no big deal.
And if you give them the way out, right, the easy way out, where you can say, hey, look, if you just do this, then we can be totally fine with it. Then it turns that into a good interaction.
It doesn't always work out.
Yeah.
We start
I know,
and
right.
the idea was to start nice.
Start nice and go where you have to.
Did everyone see Martin's keynote last night?
Yeah.
One of the things he mentioned was the lawsuit between White Wolf and Sony over the Underworld movie and the similarities, and actual line-by-line dialogue stolen from one of the vampire
I
stories.
wasn't here for that.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that?
Yeah.
This was a while ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was when the first Underworld movie came out.
Yeah.
The big thing was they gender flipped the relationship. So in the actual vampire story, it was a werewolf and a vampire, and they just swapped it. But some of the dialogue is actually word for word.
I mean, that makes it totally different and
Yeah.
not at all.
I actually had an instance once where someone took an early version of the rules documentation that I had written and like Control F just changed certain words to such a degree that when I approached them about it,
my name was still on the file.
It's like the ownership of Microsoft Office account.
Right. Like it was still listed. Like, no, we didn't do that. You know, it just developed parallel. I'm like, that's my name. Like it literally says Michael Pucci, Tyler Nerden. Like
You took my word, dog.
you took my word.
So sometimes people will, so here's a cool trick you can do. When you write something that has any length at all to it, like you write a source book or something like that, throw in some misspelled words here and there or some formatting that's not quite right? And don't do it to the point where it looks unprofessional, but a little here and there is not going to be bad, because when people copy stuff like that, they won't notice. And then you've got direct evidence that's like, what are the chances that you and I both did this formatting error in the exact same place, right? Yeah.
Somebody said the name of that technique.
Paper towns.
Yeah.
That's what cartographers used to do.
Yeah.
They would put a fake town somewhere on a map when they were making
Yeah.
Tangled towns. Then they would know.
A phone
someone
directory
copied my
once
map.
did
Huh.
fake names and addresses and phone numbers, and they put 5 of it in this huge big phone book, right? The other phone company or the other phone book company had those same wrong ones. Where would you get that from except from us?
Huh.
When I was sending out playtest documents for Margaret Weiss and Onyx Path, I've got different group playtest groups, and there's a file sharing problem in the tabletop RPG community. And we want to know who's leaking our stuff, so each group gets a slightly different document.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep.
Like I'll change the name of a discipline or something like that, and so when that eventually gets shared,
You can just narrow it down.
right.
Who's not your friend anymore?
Two questions back here.
I just really quickly want to say if you can also very simply put a word that is the same color as the background, but is still in the
Right.
text of the document.
Yeah.
So it can be a combination of random letters and numbers if you want, and you Control F it and you'll find it.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yep.
Well, I was curious as to like how do you guys go about like locating the people who are doing some like copyright infringement on you?
I
For
always
example, the
find
other
out.
game. Huh?
I always
It's,
find out.
it's your salespeople
Okay.
and your customers that are your best scouts.
Yeah.
So as long as you have open communication with them and they feel empowered to tell you about that stuff, they will, and they'll
Okay.
find it.
In fact, as you were all sitting down, I got a message from one of our Virginia players that he found somebody has made an app of a bunch of our stuff.
Ah.
So, like, and he's a friend of ours, and no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the app, and if it's a free app that is just sharing the same, we'll see. I gotta look at it.
So
I gotta
let's,
look at it.
Jason, a lot of this will be for you, but let's talk a little bit about, using this as an example, what do you do as a company to protect your assets?
Right.
I mean, you said send a nice letter or a mean letter. Let's drill down on that a little bit.
So I speak at a lot of different conferences, and the one that I was just at, the class I taught was identifying and protecting IP. And so I've kind of classified, there's 5 key activities that you tend to do when you're protecting your IP. So the first one is due diligence. So you want to make sure in creating your IP or publishing it or whatever you're doing, you want to make sure you're not stepping on other people's toes, and so that's where you do trademark searches and domain searches and patent searches and those sorts of things. And patent searches won't really be relevant in this community for the most part, but unless you're doing something really cool online, right? But trademark searches are always going to be relevant, and then you also want to do your due diligence on, if I hire some people to write for me, I want to make sure that they're not copy-pasting things from someone else, and just switching who the vampire and who the werewolf is, right? You need to, make sure that they're really clear about those things. So due diligence is one thing. Notices is another thing. So you see the trademark notices, the copyright notices, patent pending, the circle R. Use those, use them right, and use them all the time. They're free, right? It doesn't cost you anything to put a copyright notice at the bottom of your website, at the bottom of your materials. The TM symbol, you can use that. You don't have to talk to an attorney. You don't have to register anything with anybody. If there's something that you think is your branding, you put a TM next to it, and either superscript it or subscript it, but just do that. The Circle R, you have to have the federal registration, but the TM, you can just do normal. Now, I hate the way that they've done this. There's no analogy with the copyright symbol. There's only one copyright symbol, whether you've got a registered copyright or not, it's the same symbol. Okay, so don't get confused with that, right? And then also, you know, in your verbalizations or in your press releases or whatever you do, you need to talk about, you know, our proprietary system or our, our protected system. You know, obviously don't go overboard with that, but, you know, make sure that you're loud enough with, I have valuable property, I know it's mine, okay? Because I can't tell you how many times people have come to me when they get that cease and desist letter from Getty for using images on their website, right? And it's like, you give us $10,000 because you found this photo on your website that's ours, right? And they say, well, when I was out looking for images, I just looked for the ones that didn't have the copyright symbol because I knew that they were free, right? Now, that is not true at all. So don't do that. But there's a lot of people doing that. And if you have a copyright notice, they won't steal your stuff. All right, so just make sure you do the notices. Registrations are really important and when they're appropriate, all right? I'm a really creative guy. I know a lot about intellectual property law. I can spend any budget that you give me, okay? There's no amount of money that I can't find a good use for. So you've got to prioritize, okay? And say, no, this is what we're gonna do. But you wanna get a core protection on your rights if what you're doing has a national or international scope, right? You've got customers all over, you need to protect all over, okay? So trademark registrations. Now here's something that a lot of people don't know. Copyright registrations. They are so underutilized. You can file them yourself with a decent chance of success if you're a real professional organization. Still have a lawyer do it because the chances of it, you don't want to have a copyright that when you then go to assert it, it doesn't work, okay? That's a horrible time to find out that you've made a mistake. You're looking at spending $400 to $800 for a copyright application, okay? That copyright application, because of the Berne Convention that the US is a party to, and that pretty much all the rest of the developed world is a party to, covers the entire world without having to file anything extra or pay anything extra, okay? So your rights in that material are protected worldwide automatically with one registration. And that registration increases your ability to enforce your rights like 100-fold, all right? So now that said, you automatically get copyright rights anything that you put into a fixed format, right? So if my daughter, who's 7, takes my crayon and draws on my wall, right? And then I take a picture of it and put it on Facebook, I violated her copyright rights if I didn't have her permission, okay? But what damages can she do against me? Whereas if she got a registration,
some solid damage.
yeah, well, no, she could get me to take it down, right? But how can she prove that she lost revenue? Right? She can't. Can she prove that I gained revenue unlawfully from it? No, I made grandma happy, right? Okay, but exact same situation. If she has a copyright registration, she can nail me for up to $150,000 in damages, statutory damages. Okay. Now, please don't tell her any of this because she's getting on rules. All right. But that's
registrations
is important too. And you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question about derivative works. So how do derivative works and copyright work? Say you have a rule book and for a game and a new team comes in and writes a new version of that rule book that is different, but still uses some paragraphs that are the same. Who is that copyright automatically assigned to? Is it the new team? Is it the old team?
So here's the thing with copyrights, and this is different with trademarks. Okay, copyright never automatically assigns to anybody, right? So there's an exception to that. In a work for hire situation. Okay? People talk about work for hire contracts, and people put work for hire in contracts all the time, but that's not really how work for hire works. Work for hire is a very specific list of employment situations, jobs, like specific jobs. They list out what your job is, right? And if you have that job and you're an employee and you do that job to create the material, it automatically assigns to your employer. Okay, that's work for hire. Everything else is automatically owned by the author, right? So like an example with my daughter, I own the canvas she drew on, I own the material she used to draw with it, right? She's my kid, right? But she owns it automatically, okay? And the only way to transfer those rights is with a signed agreement in writing, okay? And so when you're talking about authors, and some industries are really sloppy about this. They'll hire people and they'll just think that it's theirs, right? But it's not. And they could stop you from using it at any time. So when you hire people to do writing for you, even editing, if they're just doing technical editing, you don't have to worry about it. But if they're doing substantive editing, changing stories, things like that, right? You want to have a written agreement with them that says, hey, we own what you're creating, and it needs to be a written, signed agreement. So yeah.
So what happens if someone doesn't do due diligence, right? They don't do the Google searches. They go after a trademark and they go and they look at the trademark and say, nah, there's nothing there. That's it. Where's that line between they've done their due diligence and they haven't done their due diligence?
Right. Well, due diligence is sort of like that future looking, right? You're looking into the future and you're saying, if I follow this path, what does my future look like, right? If you don't do the due diligence, then you get to just experience the future, right? And the experience might be getting a cease and desist letter, right? And you've got a garage full of materials that are now violating someone's rights that you can't sell, right? And now what do you do with it?
Right.
You're just going to throw it all away, and that may have been $40,000 worth of a container load of stuff.
Right. But what if it's the other way around, right? You get a cease and desist letter for something that you've been using for years.
Right. So there are some situations where, like what you were talking about, where if they're not enforcing their rights, right?
Well, perhaps they you've been using this thing for years, and they went out and did a trademark search, didn't see it, and said, oh, we're going to trademark this name.
Right. So you will have rights. You'll have trademark rights in the geographic area where you have had continual sales, right? They would then, if they're going for like a trademark, so we're talking trademarks here, right? They'd go for a trademark registration. You could oppose that, right? And then there would be a big nasty fight where you would have to prove a bunch of things, and they would try to stop, prove a bunch of things and prove that they were first, and it ends up this big mess. But what it ends up with, if you go all the way through to the end of that fight, which most people don't, they settle for in some other way. But you end up with, you get certain areas of the country, they get all the rest. You're completely limited in your ability to grow. You would have to put things on your website. So if you sell your product on the web, right, but you've never really sold into California, you would have to put blockers so that when IP addresses from California come to your website, they don't get you, they get them, right? And so, and who wants to share part of the United States with someone else? And so nobody does. So typically you'll do some sort of a settlement agreement where you do, one of you licenses to the other, right? And you end up sharing in a way that's not as bad as what the court would have you do, okay? And I've even had judges come out and say this and say, I'm going to go back in my room and I'm going to think about this for half an hour, and I'm going to come back out here, and chances are nobody's going to like what I'm going to say. But if you guys happen to settle this before I, boom, and say my stuff, then maybe you'll be happier, right? And a lot of times that's what happens. They get together and they say, all right, what's about to happen is going to suck. Let's make something prettier than that.
Mediation is not about happiness, it's about being able to tolerate the middle ground.
So yeah, but that's why you want to do your due diligence first, right? You don't want to, you want to choose your futures. You want to be able to see what that looks like, and also it'll make a difference in the trademarks that I file. If the trademark search comes back and it looks wide open, right? Then I may word the trademark in a way or change things in the application to say, no, I want to grab this space, right? I thought I could get this space, but you know, this is open. Let's take as much as we can, all right? But if it comes back tighter, then I might say, you know what, we're going to be really careful about how we phrase this, and we're not going to talk about online anything at all, even though maybe that's an ancillary part of the business, right? And then that way, I make sure I don't get in trouble and I don't get any fights, because you know, my side of the lawyer thing is kind of expensive, especially when people haven't been in business before and this is new for them. But compared to litigation and compared to marketing too, it's nothing, right? So avoid that when you can.
This is a little bit off topic, but I have been engaging with several like worldwide companies and wanted to do stuff with their IPs, and everything goes well and dandy when you talk to the creatives and those who make the decisions, and then it hits the legal department and everything stops. Because, of course, legal will be legal, as you know. So, do you have any good, any smart ideas how to engage with the legal department to make sure that you meet them in the best possible way? Because, of course, they're going to talk to their bosses and so on, but what is the best way to approach the legal department when you want to talk about getting hands on an IP? Because I often
For LARP purposes.
for LARP
specifically.
purposes. So, for example, we talked to George R. R. Martin, and he was like, you should do a LARP, but I sold all my rights to the visual rights to HBO. You need to talk to them about that because LARP is a visual thing. So, we of course can talk to them about it, but you know, it's difficult. Do you have any, what is best practices to engage with the legal department on? Is it language, or is it a specific mindset, or which buttons should you push to get a smooth start? If that makes any sense whatsoever.
So I have some ideas on that, unless you guys want to go for it. Okay, so here's the deal. Usually the lawyer doesn't own the IP, right? Which means the lawyer doesn't get to make the end decision. The lawyer's job is to keep his client out of trouble, keep them safe, right? And so they're going to be talking doom and gloom scenarios. They're going to be, so there's a lot of lawyers that are deal killers, okay? And I try not to be a deal killer, but sometimes I am, right? Because I'm like, I don't like this deal, okay? But what you have to realize is you are not arguing with the lawyer, okay? The lawyer is an advisor. They're on the side. You're doing a deal with the person on the other side. And so if you direct your focus and attention to fighting with the lawyer, you've given the lawyer more power than they actually have. Okay? So lawyer comes in and says their thing, and you say, okay, whatever. That's their reality. The reality is we really want to do a deal together, and we've got to find a way. And part of that way might be you telling your lawyer, thanks for the advice, but we're going to go with this, right? Yeah. And I've had clients do that with me, where I'm like, don't take this deal. This is a stupid deal. They don't have any rights, right? Their design patent is ridiculous. It doesn't even cover what they're doing. And then my client says, yeah, but for $3,000, I can be done with this and move on to the next thing I'm going to do, right? And I say, well, okay, I understand that, but know that they're extorting you. And he's like, okay, I'm fine being extorted because I want to do the next thing, right? And that's really how it is.
Yep.
So you're not arguing with the lawyer, you're connecting with this other business person,
Yep.
right? And sometimes even emotional things, like you just move from logic to emotion, because emotion moves things forward.
So I have a question, actually, kind of follow-up for all of you. Does LARP exist in your experience, in the mindset of people with whom you need to write contracts? I can imagine for liability, like rentals, insurance, like, do you run into problems because what you do is LARP specifically?
I'm going to actually break that up into two topics.
Okay.
Related. First, we'll talk a little bit about using your Game of Thrones example. You reach out to somebody at HBO, and do they even know what LARP is, and what are some of the challenges, the ways people can deal with that? And then we'll jump from there into like talking to hotels and venues and things like that.
I actually have a personal experience with that. About 5 years ago, we were working with a TV production company on materials that were based on the Dystopia Rising IP. And one of the first meetings with the backers was roughly 3 hours in a suite at the top of a building in New York, explaining to them that LARP was a real thing and that yes, people actually do this. Literally, one of the backers had, as the conversation was going on, crawled up onto the couch and was almost perched on the couch, so amazed that people did this. If I had that conversation today, it might be very different.
There's also, there's no playbook for LARP as a business. There are companies out there that have been doing them as a business in varying ways, you know, for years. But by and large, it is not a business-oriented place. And I have personal feelings on whether or not making it a business helps legitimize it in the population as a whole. But that's a whole other conversation for not this panel. But I don't run into a lot of people, more and more as it goes, but I do not historically run into a lot of other people who see LARP as business. And then I suppose we can have the argument on whether or not it should be. We can do that. And I run into a lot of people that I have to spend a lot of time explaining that it is a business and that it can be a business. The mentality that you can't make a living off of LARP is prevalent, and as a LARP business owner, I'm kind of okay with that being the case.
I did have one case where I was doing a murder mystery based on a novel that I really liked, and the author thought it was fantastic and wanted to play, wanted to be the villain, and, you know, but her attorney said, "What is that? I don't understand."
Right. I've had a lot of conversations because there is no real playbook for LARP as a business. A lot of what I've had to do starts with explaining what LARP is to people who are outside of the world. I got really lucky, after a lot of searching, I got very lucky with our law firm who didn't know what LARP was, but was open to understanding it. She figured it out, and she's become fairly well versed in it. Though I just recently had a conversation with a woman in the firm that does labor laws, who just can't grasp what it is we're doing. And so like the conversation has actually had to come to a stop because I just can't get her to grasp what it is that I do. We have a bookkeeper who didn't understand it, but at the end of the day, money in and money out, whatever. Our accountant, who does our auditing and our tax returns, had a real hard time. Last year was a lot of meetings. Last year was a lot of explanations, and so there was a lot of, I found a lot of work, a lot of extra work, explaining LARP as a business to the people I want to do business with.
Yeah. I have
I don't know if that answers that part of the question.
We did a LARP with an Irish author. He written 9 books, very popular in the UK, and now they're making a movie with Sony Pictures. And in the contract with Sony Pictures, it states that the LARP rights is held by the author. So it's,
There we go.
yeah, so it's,
I love
Very cool.
That has to be the goal, like we have to get that,
Yes.
it's gonna be
Yes.
industry norm for everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm honestly working on it, and it's kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I'm trying to figure out how to document what it is we're doing so that people in the future don't have to start at zero. So I think with that kind of in mind.
So with you guys' 3 businesses, which do you find the most legally maze-like?
The franchise.
Franchise
The
hands
franchise,
down.
the franchise, okay.
Yeah, I don't think I can physically answer that faster.
They do not even compare.
Yeah.
Just-
Related to maybe some of the VIP people not understanding. Let's talk a little bit about venues and rental and just explaining to a hotel what LARP is. That's a little easier now than back when I started.
Getting easier.
Oh, yeah.
But not always. Just a couple months ago, I was looking for new venues to run new Masquerade LARP, and the blank look, and then am I safe in this room? She was backing out of it.
Something?
Yeah, that was an experience I hadn't had for a couple of years, and then she's like, "Are you gonna?" Because she was thinking boffer.
Yeah.
Well, once she started to understand,
You're not
she
gonna be
zeroed
doing
in on
battle
a very
in the lobby.
specific
Yeah.
thing, and she's like, "Oh, we can't do
She
that."
saw role models.
Yeah.
I oftentimes find it amazing the number of instances where we will approach a business, either a host or insurance companies or licensees, with the scenario where it's, we would like to give you large sums of money for goods and services, and the response is, we don't understand what it is you're doing. That's fine. I would like you to understand what we're doing. However, I would like to give you large sums of money for the goods and services that you offer everyone. And it's a very strange conversation to have on a regular basis.
Does that connect to insurance issues?
Yeah,
if you're
that's
renting
where I was
a-
going next.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Could you talk to that?
There's a block of insurance companies that, at this point, that offer LARP policies. There's 4 that I know of, and I actually just heard at some point this weekend somebody mention one that I was unaware of. So there are companies out there who understand what LARP is.
Can I ask what they are?
We use Anthony Fire Insurance. I would say Hiscox, but I don't think that's going to be the case for a long time. I would have to look it up.
FL Dean.
Oh, yep, FL Dean, yep. There's another one. If you find me at some point after the panel, I'll look it up. I have a list on our forums, and they understand what LARP is and whatnot. And it's relatively cheap. It's not overly expensive. I think I pay for the branch that we run. I think I pay $300 a year. It's not, it's not a lot of money. And I've never had to put a claim in. So what the actual service is like,
We'll say.
I don't know.
Do you do overnight events?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No. I hope to never find out whether or not their customer service and actual coverage is good.
Is that for like $1 million a cover?
Yeah, it's million standards. I think whatever's at the bottom of that block is 500,000. But yeah, it's just a standard.
500,000 personal liability, $1 million property damage.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
That is some.
It's
Good
not a, it's
Yeah.
the standard block of amounts.
So I know the space.
I just want to add that it's important when you're talking to hotels that talking to the sales department is not the same as talking to the people who are going to be on the desk that day. It's not talking to their facilities people.
Yes, Harrison, yes.
His eyes are
Very
open.
Yes,
It's
yes.
insane.
Oh yeah, Harrison got real this weekend.
Without a doubt, yes.
And in that regards, I find that there's a lot of effort trying to normalize the hobby, I guess is the only way that I can put it. And I feel that we do that a lot with running it as a business. When I approach these hotels, when I approach an insurance company, when I approach a prop maker or Home Depot or wherever it is outside of us that we go, I'm very ready to have that conversation with them, to explain to them what it is, and this gets into a little personal crusade of explaining it without shame, explaining it without being embarrassed. Just, this is what we do. It's not weird. You might not have heard of it, but I also don't know the rules of football, so what else?
Right.
Like, it's just because you don't know it doesn't mean it's weird. And if I present it weird, they take it as weird. If I present it as just a normal business, then they take it as a normal business. It might be a new, interesting normal business, but whatever. And so I think, we do ourselves a real favor. Gotta be preachy.
We try to do that for the Intercon convention, the LARP conventions that we run, and we had a really bad experience with a hotel that had more function space, which we thought was going to work out, but they were a business hotel. The salespeople were happy to sell us stuff, and then it got ugly, and when we actually showed up, we had hostile reactions to staff just pointing and laughing and saying very nasty things. It was not a pleasure.
I hope you call her something.
The last Vampire LARP I ran, I had a complete opposite experience. Hotel employees stopped working and LARPed.
That's awesome.
They put a sign up on the registration desk, "We'll be back in 15 minutes," because they had to be in this scene.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
good. About that.
We've had similar experiences at camp where the dining hall staff and cleaning staff at the campsites that were running things out left. The first day they're like, what are you doing? And then by like day 3 they're like, all right, give us a character.
Yeah.
We're in.
Yeah.
If we actually
To have a
incorporate
conversation, oftentimes people will become interested or even try it. I mean, even if you're covered in fake blood and being pulled over by a state trooper.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can get that state trooper to show up at your game the
Yeah.
next month.
Sounds like there's a story there.
Yeah. we gotta-
That pretty much sums up the entire story.
We actually incorporated the hotel security into their own, actually as hotel security, but they were also in character.
Nice.
They were ghouls of the prince, who was
Right.
hosting
Oh,
the event.
perfect.
So they could still work, but they could then drift in and be, yeah.
Is there a business organization, a trade union, or whatever it would be called, for actually on the employee side, for Larp businesses in the United States?
No, there aren't enough people for that to have formed, for anything like that to have
Yeah.
formed.
Because I think maybe we should like have an international network, because I think we could help each other out, especially
Yeah.
like if there's franchise models start expanding to Europe or whatever, or we need to run games here. We have problems that are trivial for each other to solve.
Yeah.
Just an informal thing, not a costly thing or anything that people have invested a lot of money in, but like maybe a Facebook group
Yeah,
or something
maybe
like that.
I'm open to it.
communications.
Yeah.
Would be great.
The more that we make groups with it, the more that we make organizations, the more we formalize how LARP is done. And I don't mean in game design. I don't,
Oh, no.
I don't want to tell anybody how to do things.
Better LARP-
And 10 years later, you
better
look
LARP
back and
business
remember the
group.
day that
Yeah,
Larp
like the more we
was
do
formed.
things like that, I think the more we'll grow. We'll grow the hobby. We'll grow the ability for people to join, and we'll be able to.
And really, even as a business model, we all know that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, I think, an important, I guess, kind of side note maybe to include. I'm just gonna just
Yeah.
throw your books. Sorry, books. Is that like we spend a lot of time protecting the DRIP. We spend a lot of time thinking about that stuff, but that's not. I don't think that's what we got into it for. And so
Right.
there's other games. There's a whole other game, a theater game line that we print, we put out there, and.
We say just
Not to
do stuff.
give away any secrets, but we have in fact active plans of opening it up so that people can just go and play it and do whatever the crap they want to with it. And so it's not, while we have to spend a lot of time on that legal side, it's not. I don't think anybody is. I'm going to speak broadly and make a generalization that I don't think anybody is trying to keep the hobby to themselves. I don't know if that to translate. Jeremy might be trying to keep it to himself, no big deal.
I was gonna do websites first, but that was next, so let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so fair use is this concept that a technical violation of the law is still okay, right? And it's a very gray, fuzzy area of copyright law, and it only applies to copyright law. It doesn't apply to patents or trademarks or trade secrets. And but the concept is, culturally, we've decided that there's some kinds of copying that are good for society, or that the good outweighs the bad. And so, but there's no bright lines. And so that makes it a little worrisome, a little troublesome. And so, in cases where there's not very much copying at all, and where the copying is not very public, then people tend to overuse free use or fair use, right? But since nobody really even notices that it's happening, then it doesn't matter, right? But at least it allows you to go forward without anxiety, okay? But if you're going to do something on a bigger scale, on a, you're launching a national product, right? If you're going to rely on fair use, you probably want to have an attorney's opinion saying that you are relying on fair use and why. And the benefit of that opinion is, and it'll be a written opinion, right, researched out and everything, the benefit of that opinion is that if it turns out it's not fair use, if the judge disagrees with your lawyer, then the judge is going to hit you with actual damages instead of triple damages, right? And the thought behind that is, well, you thought you were doing the right thing, so we're not going to punish you, okay? But some of the factors with fair use are, is the use educational versus commercial? Or is the fair use political? Is the fair use a replacement for the product that the person is selling, right? Or is it not? Is it transformative, right? It's transformed into something else? Kind of on the derivative works question, is it a derivative work in that in that it's like the next book in the series, or it's still in that same universe, right, and has lots of ties to the original, and therefore really it's owned by whoever created the original, or is it derivative in the inspired by sense, right? And another thing is like, so what did you copy? Did you copy real specific facts and details or lines of dialogue, right? Or were you just copying scenes or plot lines or things like that? And so, you know, those sorts of things, yeah, you can copy those all day long, right? I mean, how many love stories are there where the girl thinks the guy's a jerk in the beginning, right? I mean, how many ways can you tell that story? An infinite number of ways. We're not going to stop anybody from telling that story. So, so yeah, I mean, if there's the Wikipedia article on it is great. You can take a look at that. But if you're going to rely on a big scale, then you need to just make sure you get, you know, you at least get an understanding of how do I feel like I qualify for fair use.
Now, what about on a small scale? I'm running a LARP that may run 10 times, it may run 20 times, you know.
Right. Are you charging people to be part of it?
No.
Okay. Are you advertising?
Although I may run it at a convention that does charge.
Okay. So whether you're charging or not is one of the key factors, right? So if you never charge for it, or you just, you know, people contribute to pay for props and stuff like that, but you know, it's not a commercial enterprise, then you're better off. If there's some sort of educational component to it, which maybe there isn't now, but you could inject one into it, then that tends to be more fair use. If there's a political component, political speech is really well protected in the United States. We love that stuff, right? And so, and that's not a saving thing. That's not always going to save you, but that's one of the factors that's really helpful. If you do it at a convention and you're charging for it, but you're charging close to or less than what the cost to produce it is, then they're going to treat that as not really commercial, right? You're not really making a profit. You're just, you know, covering expenses.
Right. Well, I mean, the convention charges, I come and I run my game at the convention.
But you're not getting paid.
No.
Okay, then yeah, then you're not. So you're probably just fine. And then also think about, you know, there's sort of two layers to fair use. One of them is when I look at you and I analyze what you've done, does it count as fair use, right? And the layer on top of that that's sort of invisible is, am I even going to look at you, right? And so if you're doing something that doesn't threaten my core business, then I'm probably not even going to look at you.
Perhaps a decent example is for the DR Larp, people make custom weapons a lot, and they'll include like religious symbols or, you know, just iconic from the world. And like, have I given them rights to use that? No, but I'm not going to track down boffer weapons that have a symbol on it. Like it's a little bit different.
Yeah,
but,
cosplayers.
Yeah, like I'm not going to. It's not worth my time. I'm not interested, and I don't honestly want to. I want people to make weapons. I want them.
But I run a convention, and you know, well, I'm as part of the team that runs convention. But we have people who did LARPs that are, you know, they're silly parodies of you know, The Simpsons or something like that, or you know.
Well, and the rising generation, right, the maker generation, right, they feel completely entitled to everything, right? So they're doing fair use all the time. And you look on YouTube, and you know, if there's a game that, so my kids love Undertale, right? There is so much fan stuff about Undertale, you would not believe it. And these people are devoted to it. And my kids are watching this stuff that, in my eyes, is a bunch of crap. The production quality is so terrible. My kids love it, right? And Undertale would be crazy to stop that stuff.
That said, I mean, I think we've heard in Klaus's talk today a pretty good example. You make a relatively small, like 140-person LARP, which is, you organize it through a non-profit. Okay, people are getting paid because a non-profit has subcontractors who are professional LARP makers, but still, and you release it. You sell all the tickets before you've even done like a written line of design, like, you know, or very little. So already there you're like, oh, this seems like a cool idea. Of course, you're not going to expect it to be in Vanity Fair, so when, like, at the point when the cease and desist comes from Warner Brothers, it's predictable, but like, it's predictable only when the thing has already happened. And then we're back to what we were talking about before. I don't think it's obvious that Warner should have the LARP rights to Harry Potter. I don't think it's obvious that HBO has the LARP rights. It's very clear that they're not in the public domain. Somebody has those rights. But I think it's also about the vagueness, like that this art form doesn't actually exist in a contractual sense. So then it's just like people dressed up as stuff belongs to us. No, I mean, yeah, no.
I just saw recently, Disney sent a cease and desist to a company that was doing characters that show up for birthday parties and whatnot. And they were using Jedi, they were using a lot of the Disney IP. And I came across it because someone that I'm friends with on Facebook shared it, and the comment that he put with the link was, hey, all my cosplay friends, watch out, they're coming for you. And I had to explain, it makes me mad, I had to explain that, like, Disney doesn't care about your cosplay. They sent that cease and desist because that company is making money off of their IP. The cosplayer who's making a costume, the guy who's making a boffer weapon, like, they're not, I kind of think of it as a way more simplified term, but I generally, we shy away from fair use, from anything that would, we make our own stuff, and I don't have one less headache I ever have to have. But I generally think of it as, am I making money off a thing I don't own? Am I taking money away from the people who own it? And if the answer is no and no, then I think it's probably safe. And if the answer is yes to either of those, then personally, I'm going to probably avoid it.
We've got the big Star Trek fan films versus
Accent
Paramount
there.
case going on right now.
Yeah.
Well, it's Klingon.
Some headaches I think are just worth it.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's going to win.
I think
No,
they're dropping
nobody
it now.
wins in the
Paramount's
lawsuits.
dropping
It was
Well, I'm saying
They are?
yeah,
whether it's
yeah.
financial or not, I'm saying nobody wins.
Yeah, yeah.
No, the emotional toll of a lawsuit
Right.
Outweighs any financial cost. At least that's.
All right, we are almost out of time. We've got time for one more question and then some closing thoughts. Anybody?
So what happens if you have, again, running a convention, there's someone we know is a problem, and they sign up? What are we allowed to do or not do
Excellent question.
with this person?
So,
I know some guys at the NSA, you can just call them and,
Well, I know some of those
and
guys.
the guy will
do.
disappear.
Yeah, I wish.
Yeah, no.
If you are running a private event, it's your right to allow or disallow people. I am not well versed in discrimination law. Do not quote me as an expert on this topic, but my understanding is discrimination only happens if you are discriminating a type of person. If I don't allow people of Jewish heritage to come to my event, then I'm discriminating. If I know a guy who, if I have a guy show up to my convention who is known for punching dudes in the face, and he happens to be Jewish, and I tell him to get out, I'm not discriminating against,
discriminating against budget.
I'm discriminating against assholes. That's maybe.
Yeah, not a protected class.
Yeah, not a protected class.
Thank God.
So, just riffing on that a little bit, what kind of protections can a group, or what should they be doing if they have a specific individual that they want to ban from a venue? How does the group actually protect themselves and still follow through on that? Anybody?
In the instances that it's happened with us, it has thankfully never been like a real, we've never had somebody that we've banned from an event who's really come back at us. But we try to just be very frank. If we know they're coming, if we know they intend on attending, we'll probably reach out to them ahead of time. Just, hey, we heard you're coming to game, or we heard you're coming to, we heard you're coming to the event. These are the things that we understand. We don't know if they're true or not. Generally, I like to leave that. I like to avoid accusations. We don't know if it's true or not, but here's our community guidelines. Here's how we run the events, and it's we have a concern that if you were to come to the events based on these things that we've come to understand are true, I don't think this is the right fit for you. And I usually close it with I'm sorry, sorry for any inconvenience. I hope you find a great group that fits well with what you're looking for in gaming. best of luck with your future events. You know, I try to phrase it as politely as possible, but very, very, I don't leave any room for argument. It's not, hey, we heard this thing, and I'm not sure that it's gonna be okay. It's just, hey, we heard you punch kittens. This is a kitten convention. You can't come.
The conference, so I flew here from a business conference where I taught, and we've had to kick people out of that, right? Or give them timeouts and things like that. And I would say the keys are, you want to have clear standards of conduct or clear values, right, that the group has, so that people are not surprised when you have an issue with what they've done. Right? And obviously that will evolve over time because people will find new and interesting ways to make everyone else uncomfortable. The other piece is you want to have leadership, right? The leadership needs to be clear who's responsible for policing that, for making those decisions, and for implementing it. You know, who's going to tell the person that no, you're not welcome, right? And then also you need to be careful about when and how you do it, right? Who's around. There's all sorts of social consequences for having these conversations. And then also realize that there are some people that are just not okay, right? A few months ago, that there was a guy, he was really upset, but you know, you find out later that he was off his meds, and he's, you know, so he's not really in his right mind, and you just need to realize they're acting in a certain way right now because they're having a temporary experience. It's a temporary feeling and a temporary, you know, disconnect from reality. And the things that you do with them while they're in that, you want to just try to make sure that you don't do anything that has permanent consequences when there's a temporary experience going on, right? So just, you know, be careful, be gentle, be firm, have clear lines, but don't try to control everything. You know, if you feel yourself starting to get your own temporary experience, right, then, you know, bring help, bring people in, and, you know, and that's what we did. I mean, this guy was just really out of control and really dangerous and scary, right? And so you kind of, you bring in people and you say, all right, you know, we want it, but make sure the leadership is, you know, we're not going to hurt this person, we're going to be firm, we'll call security, we'll call the police if we need to, right? But just, you know, let's do this in a way that people are the highest priority.
I often try to phrase things, and this is, I do this anytime we have to like discipline or speak with anybody, but it goes for this as well. I often will try to address the problem as though it's a third party. Not, you can't come to this event because you did these things. It's, I can't have you come to this event because these things happened. And it's not my job to fix their problems, it's just my job to make the event happen. And so I find I guess it's probably less aggressive. I'm sure there's techniques about it that I'm just not aware of officially. But I find a lot of success with making it a third party in the conversation rather than you did this thing. So your mileage may vary, but.
I would also not hesitate in the instance that things escalate, like you mentioned. Make sure you get the proper authorities involved when needed.
Oh, yeah.
While we are leaders of our communities, there are real world laws, there are real world situations that we are not, unless that is what you do in the real world, that we are not legally or really prepared to be able to handle.